And here we go. So my name is Heather Disque, and I am like I said, the Forest Health Entomologist for MDA FPM. And so today we're going to go through a wild woodland update. And so it's going to be quick. And so if you have any questions, like I said, put them in the chat box and we'll answer them at the end. So our first pest today is going to be emerald ash borer. Emerald ash borer has been in Maryland since 2003. There was an eradication effort that went underway, but unfortunately it failed. So what does emerald ash borer look like? So if you are familiar with it, let me get my pointer. So this is what the beetle looks like. It is bright emerald green, hence the name emerald, and the name ash. It attacks ash trees. It also does attack white fringe tree. White fringe tree is able to withstand emerald ash borer populations, so it doesn't necessarily kill the white fringe tree. It kind of does this really interesting thing, the white fringe tree, where it puts additional layers of tissue over top of the larval gallery, so it's able to kill the emerald ash borer larvae. Unfortunately, ash doesn't have that capability or that defense mechanism against borers attacks. So what you'll see is these S-shaped galleries. Here you can see they're very thin starting off and they get larger as they grow. And then they will exit the tree. This is what the larvae look like. They're also called flat-headed borers. So the beginning part of their head is flat. A lot of times we can tell that EAB has attacked trees by seeing this D-shaped exit hole. So the top of the exit hole is flat and then followed by a curved sign. In addition to this, the best way to tell is woodpecker damage. And so woodpecker damage on ash is they're very good at finding these larvae. And so that usually tells you when an infestation has started. So with our emerald ash borer program activities, what are we currently doing? So we do treat trees in park locations and in natural areas for EAB. And so here's what one of our wildland treatments looks like. So we try to treat both female and male trees. So that way we can have a seed source for the future to hopefully be able to have trees regrow in these areas once the main EAB infestation has come through and killed the majority of the trees. And then once the EAB population dies back off, then these trees will hopefully be there in the future. And so you can see we do trunk treatments, and so I'll go into that in a little bit. And then so you can kind of see this is an interesting area. It's wet, and so a lot of the holes have to be up here above the high water tide for where we're putting the chemical in. So it's kind of interesting. These up here, these treatment areas are all parks. So these are state parks that have either in their campgrounds or in their nature areas have high value trees that need to be protected from EAB. So we also set adult traps. And so these traps are detection traps. So we currently haven't been able to collect a beetle in Wicomico or Worcester County. And so you can see these circles here are all where the adult traps are. In addition, we have adult traps in our parasitoid release locations. So you can see here in Kent County, and we have another in Cecil County, and then the 2 in Garrett County. So like I said, these are with our parasitoid release locations. So Cecil, we thought we were going to be releasing parasitoids here this year, but we did not. So we collected EAB adults in all of our previously positive counties of Kent, Garrett, and Cecil County. Where did we release parasitoids? So this year we released parasitoids at the Savage River State Forest. And so there we released 400 oobius, which are egg parasitoids, and about 2,000 Spathias galeni, which are larval parasitoids. And then at this Millington site here, we released 1,200 oobius. So this is done with a cooperative with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, APHIS. For EAB treatment options, so we treat with emamectin benzoate, triage G4. So G4 is a little less toxic than triage. It has the same emamectin benzoate at 4%. It's just that the inert ingredients are less toxic to the environment. So that's why we use G4. And so we do that with a trunk injection. So here you can see our unit. So it's a centralized unit that the chemical is poured into this bottle, and then it's pumped up with a bike pump and pressurized. And then we drill holes into the base of the tree here. And then these holes then are fitted with a plug specialized for the needles that come from this centralized unit. So the unit is pressurized, then the pressure pushes the chemical through these lines into the needles, which are then plugged into the tree using a specialized plug. And then once the needle is removed, then the plug seals itself up so there is no open wounds for the tree. And so that's how we've been treating these trees. So here, this tree here is actually, this tree here. So it's one of our champion pumpkin ash in Tuckahoe State Park. One of the things I forgot to mention in the treatments for our wildland areas is that many of these areas have rare species of ash that we're treating. And so pumpkin ash is a rare species that we're treating, as well as there's a stand of Carolina ash that is rare in the state. And so that's also been being treated. One of the other treatments that other landowners can use is imidacloprid. So you can use that as an injectable or as a soil drench. Unfortunately, imidacloprid was the one product that we would recommend for landowners to be able to apply, but unfortunately, the neonicotinoid class is no longer available without a pesticide license. So both of these chemicals, you would need a pesticide license and a certified pesticide applicator to apply for you. With tree treatments, we typically recommend that unless you still have 70% of the original canopy, so you've only lost 30% of your canopy, that tree is still able to be saved. Once you've lost more than 30% of that canopy, then the water transport system for the tree is really going to have been declined through the EAB, through those galleries. And so while you may prolong the life of the tree, you're not necessarily going to save the tree. And so that's some things to think about when you're making decisions for yourselves. Where have we released emerald ash borer parasitoids? So we started the emerald ash borer parasitoid releases in 2009. And so that started down here in our main area of Prince George's and Charles County. These were our two originally infested counties. Since then, we have kind of gone through the state and are doing some releases. You can see those. So since 2016, we have to go through, like I said, USDA APHIS to apply to receive parasitoids. So a lot of times they are unfortunately, we might put out 6 or 7 different sites that we'd like to release parasitoids in, but we are only able to release at 1 or 2 sites due to availability. This is what they send to us. This is an actual parasitoid that has emerged from this log here. So you can kind of see their writing on there. That's the number of parasitoids that they estimated were in this log. And so that's the size of the parasitoid. Oh, so I wasn't sure if I had put in a slide so you could see the parasitoids, but this is a male Tetracycus. So it's one of the larval parasitoids. And the good thing is that these parasitoids are moving. So the University of Maryland is doing research currently and has found that Spatheus galeni, one of the larval parasitoids that we've been releasing in recent years, has actually traveled over 9 kilometers in 1 year from its original release site. So that's really promising that they are reproducing and moving into such great lengths already. The next pest we're going to talk about is southern pine beetle. So here is a map of where southern pine beetle traps were set in the state. So these are all areas that have been predicted to have higher populations of southern pine beetle on this side of the map. this side of the map here, we're not predicting a southern pine beetle outbreak. However, we are interested to see if southern pine beetle is increasing in our more mountainous regions, because we are seeing southern pine beetle has caused significant damage in New York, which has typically not seen southern pine beetle. So we're kind of interested to see if their increase in southern pine beetle will correlate to some of our areas of higher elevation. What does southern pine beetle look like? So here is a southern pine beetle. Here is a grain of rice. Here is another bark beetle. So this is another Dendrolimus species, but it's a little bit bigger. So here's what it looks like from egg through adult. And then here's what their galleries look like. So we had those serpentine galleries from emerald ash borer. Well, these also create these serpentine winding galleries with these chambers off of the gallery. So the beetle bore through here and then has laid her eggs on either side of the gallery, where then the larvae will hatch and start to consume the wood, and then start their life cycle over again. So what does it look like on the outside? So southern pine beetle brings with it a blue stain fungus. So it has a blue stain fungus inside of its mouth parts. It chews on the woods, it introduces the fungus, and then the beetle then takes the fungus throughout the tree with it, and then it causes this vascular discoloration. In addition to that, other bark beetles also have this blue stain fungus. So it's not necessarily always or only southern pine beetle, but you do see this with southern pine beetle. One of the things that you also see are these popcorn pitch tubes. So see this kind of stuff here coming out. So this is pitch that has dried from the tree on the outside. And so what's happening here is that the tree has a defense mechanism to be able to push the beetles out. And so what you'll see here is that they're using their pitch to try to push the beetles out of the tree. And unfortunately, with southern pine beetle, stressed trees have a pheromone smell. And so southern pine beetle is attracted to that stressed tree pheromone. In addition, southern pine beetle also has aggregation pheromones. So they will let out a pheromone saying, hey, everybody, this tree is really great for colonization. This is where you should be. And so more beetles are attracted to that tree. The tree becomes even more stressed, letting out even more stress pheromones, as well as those aggregation pheromones. And then a lot of beetles will move into this area. And then a lot of beetles are in the area reproducing. And then it basically looks like a shotgun has gone off from the exit holes that are on the tree. They're small. You saw how small the beetle was compared to the grain of rice. So their exit holes are also round and small. But a lot of times what the tree will try to do is to push the beetles out quickly. So then you'll see all these popcorn pitch tubes coming from it. And then you'll see the tree has rapidly declined. So I do have a picture of that in just a minute. But in addition to that, when we're trapping for southern pine beetle, you saw where I'd set all those traps. The other thing that we're collecting are these predatory clarid beetles. So these beetles are often go hand in hand with the southern pine beetle. And so when you find these beetles, it basically means that there's food available for them. I mean, they'll also consume other bark beetles, but this specifically goes after southern pine beetle. So in our traps, a lot of times we find this clarid beetle, but maybe only a few southern pine beetle. And so that's always good to know that these beetles are there working on the population. So what does that damage look like besides just the popcorn tubes? So here is a forest that has been killed by southern pine beetle. So this picture, those trees are right here, and then it crossed the road and started to consume these trees here, and it's kind of moving to this eastern location. So the trees will often have, they'll still have their needles on them, but they will be this bright red color. And then the trees that have no needles, have then been dead for at least a year. So southern pine beetle treatment. So with forests, we often recommend a salvage cut. So I was talking about all those pheromones. So all of those red needled trees, those would be here, trees that are being, the beetles have vacated and moved on. So yellowing trees are trees where there's an active infestation, but the beetles haven't completely killed the tree yet. And so remember how I had said the beetles had hopped the road and moved? So once you find where the trees have been vacated and where the beetles are currently residing in these yellow and light green trees, then you're going to want to go into the trees that haven't been colonized by southern pine beetle in that forward movement. So what happens is that with this salvage cut of 50 to 100 feet of uninfested trees, then it basically stops that pheromone and those beetles from moving forward. And so they won't, there won't be stress trees for them to colonize. And they'll be a bit more confused about where they should be moving next to. And so it kind of breaks up that whole cycle. And so even just cutting the trees and felling them and leaving them towards the infestation works, pile and burn works. You know, the best way is obviously to get trees debarked and out of the location, but you'll get, I think, like about a 65% effectiveness on stopping the infestation by just cutting the trees and having them felled and on the ground. There is some chemical control options for southern pine beetle. The majority of them are all labeled for ornamental use only, not for forestry use. So it's not necessarily a product that you're going to be using on a whole forest, but if you have some high value trees, you can do that. Certainly you're going to need to get to those trees prior to infestation, because most of them are bark sprays that are used as repellents. The biggest thing is to maintain healthy stands and to remove high-risk trees. So those trees are going to be lightning strike trees, trees that are overstocked and stressed. Being able to have less stressed trees and trees that don't have a lot of visible wounds, so they don't have those pheromones, are going to be what's going to help keep southern pine beetle down. So in addition to southern pine beetle and all of our loblollies and other pine stands, another thing that we are seeing in these areas is saltwater intrusion. And so we've been taking aerial flights to detect saltwater intrusion affected forests since 2011. And so we've been doing them consistently every year since 2016. And so this past year in 2021, we identified 84,381 acres of forests that are being affected by saltwater damage. So you can kind of see where those are all located. Here you can see 60,000 acres, so the majority of it is in Dorchester County. A lot of that you can see is marsh encroachment. You can see the rest, another part in Wicomico, Somerset, and Worcester counties, basically following the bay and the Assassawoman Bay. You can see here, as far as severity, the majority of these forests are being very severely affected, where about over 50% of the trees are being affected by this saltwater damage. So here is an aerial view from our flight. And so this is kind of what we're seeing is as these trees start to decline, you can see they start to die off here as they're getting more and more wet. The marshes are starting to encroach on these areas. And you can see here, like this area here would have been defined as being very severely affected. And you can see like what it used to look like with this nice bright color in the center. So this is kind of what we're seeing currently. I have it here as gypsy moth, but I did want to say that it is now called spongy moth. So For the rest of the slides here, you'll see this called spongy moth, but I did want to put gypsy moth up here just so you could, we all know what we're talking about. So spongy moth is, you can see here, these are egg masses of the spongy moth. These are very healthy egg masses. These are the larger size. They can be dime sized. But when the populations are doing well, you'll see these larger sized, we call them quarter size, even though these are probably 2/4 sized. There's female and male moths. The females do not fly, the males do. So a lot of times you'll see the males flying about, and then the females then lay the egg masses here. You can see one is being laid right now. These moths are active at the end of June through July in the state of Maryland. Here is what the caterpillars look like. So caterpillar hatch happens in April, and then in our more mountainous regions, it would be late April. And then you'll start to see these first and second, this is a second instar caterpillar. These go through 6 instars. So this here would be a 6th instar. The spongy moth are known for their blue and red dots along the caterpillar. These are defoliators. So these are what's causing these leaf damage. And so these guys are known to completely defoliate trees, and I'll have a picture of that next. The pupal stages look like this. And you'll often see these hanging by threading here on trees. So this is what a spongy moth defoliated forest looks like in June. This is not a winter picture. This is unfortunately a June 18th picture. And so this is 100% defoliation by a spongy moth. So what does spongy moth look like for the state of Maryland currently? So in our last year's spongy moth, and this is pretty much what we're seeing this year as well, is that populations are building in Garrett and Allegheny counties and Western Washington counties. These populations are still below our treatment threshold. Our treatment threshold is when we find 250 egg masses per acre. And so where did we find that? Here in Wycomico, Somerset, and Worcester counties. So here is where we proposed treatment in those red areas. So it went, you can see here, it went from the Delaware border down through Pocomoke City, across to Berlin. It's pretty widespread in this area. A lot of these populations were extremely high in the 20,000 egg masses per acre. So it was, you know, many, many times above our treatment level. So this is where we had treatment. So this was 7,411 acres that were treated for spongy moth in this past year. So what does our spongy moth suppression program look like? So it's aerial suppression. So we use a BTK. It's a biological insecticide. It's a soil bacteria. The product name is 4A. And so that is applied aerially. So this past year, we had fixed wing aircraft that were applying our biological insecticide. In previous years, we have had helicopters win the bid. We do not, MDA does not have our own aircraft for spongy moth suppression, so we do contract that out. But we are on the ground monitoring the application, as well as at the airports monitoring application. There's another product for spongy moth suppression called Mimic. It's an insect growth regulator. We have not used that currently. Other ways to get rid of spongy moth are spongy moth barrier bands. So they can either be burlap bands or sticky bands. A lot of people used to use these back in the 80s and the early 90s. It's, you know, so these spongy moth move up and down the tree. And so this either impedes their movement or they actually get stuck to the tree and you have to kind of remove them and then put the barrier back up. So it is helpful. It's not foolproof, but it does sort of help to get the job done. In addition, with burlap bands, one of the things is that it provides a safe space for the females to lay their egg masses under. So a lot of times, white oaks and other trees with bark that have little crevices are where the spongy moth like to lay their egg masses in a sort of protected state. So with the burlap bands, you'll see the females kind of crawl under them and lay their egg masses there. So they're a lot easier to remove by scraping off of the trees, which is really what can be done for spongy moth at this time of the year. So the barrier bands and specifically the sticky bands are most effective for caterpillars. Burlap bands are effective for caterpillars. And then at the end of the year, like I said, if there's female lays egg masses under there, you can scrape them off and then you can remove the burlap. Where is spongy moth this year? Unfortunately, it's in similar areas. So here is our aerial flight data from this past summer. So this is where we saw spongy moth defoliation. Again, it's from the Delaware border down through Pocomoke City. It was 20,000 acres of defoliation this year, which is 10,000 acres less than last year. And one of the reasons besides our treatments for this is that this year we did find Entomophaga mymyga, which is also known as the spongy moth fungus. And so what happens is that these caterpillars come in contact with this fungus, either from the soil or from other caterpillars that are infected with the fungus that are moving up and down the tree. And so this is a naturally occurring fungus in our environment, and it unfortunately needs a cool, wet spring to be able to reproduce to population sizes. The spores need the cool, damp weather to be able to reproduce and go into and affecting caterpillars. So 2 years ago, we didn't have those sorts of conditions in the spring, and so we saw zero fungal activity and fungus-killed caterpillars. This past year in 2022, we did see fungal-killed caterpillars, so it's nice to see it back in the environment, and it does take several years to build up within the population to higher numbers to be able to kill more caterpillars. In addition to that, we also have the nucleopolyhedrous virus, or NPV virus, that also kills caterpillars. And this, we saw it in low numbers in 21, but we saw more NPV killed caterpillars in 2022. How do we tell which is which? If you look at this picture, this caterpillar here that has passed, it's kind of desiccated in this up and down. So this was killed by the fungus, whereas this inverted V, this caterpillar was killed by the virus. So inverted V for virus-killed caterpillars, straight up and down for fungal-killed caterpillars. So those are some of our natural enemies working in the environment to assist us. In addition, we also look for, so let's see, so that would be 8 different exotic Asian defoliating moths. And so these are both Lymantria species and Dendrolimus. Lymantria is the same genus as the European spongy moth that I was just talking about. So these are Asian defoliators that are known to be able to be moved within our shipping trade. And so you can see the majority of our traps for these moths do go along our shipping channel here, the Chesapeake Bay, as well as the C&D Canal and this rail hub in Allegheny County. So currently we have found no target species of Asian gypsy moths, spongy moths, and we have caught moths in our Asian spongy moth traps. Those are unfortunately so similar to the European spongy moth that we have to send them off to be run through the Forest Health Methods Lab for genetic testing. And so with that, we have in the past only found the European spongy moth. And this year we're kind of assuming, we don't have final results, but we're assuming it's mostly the same as the moths that we collected in the Asian gypsy moth traps were during the same time as the spongy moth was flying in our area. So there was no sort of time delay or earliness of the adults. And so we kind of are assuming that they're European spongy moths, but we're going to wait for the final determination. But so far, none of these have been collected in our traps. We also do a declining oak survey. So one of the things in 2018 and then through 2019, there was this rapid white oak mortality. And so these trees would be perfectly fine. They were mature trees, no real sites, no real like site damage. There wasn't a lot of construction or anything happening that would cause these trees to kind of just very rapidly die. And then there'd be other trees that were surrounding them that were perfectly fine. And so that rapid white oak mortality that was seen, you can see this picture was taken at the National Arboretum. It was seen in Prince George's County in Maryland, as well as Montgomery County. And then that kind of got us looking to see if some of the other oak mortality within the state is caused by one specific thing or multiple things. And so we started to look for the oak wilt fungus, which can cause these sort of necrotic tissues, as well as they have these fungal mats underneath the bark, and to see if this or other causal agents linked up to where we're seeing this declining oak. And so in 2021, we did not find any oak wilt, but we did find this Diplodia canker. So this is we found in Baltimore, Harford, and Talbot County samples, as well as we found bacterial leaf scorch in Talbot County. And so while in 2021, we didn't see this across the state, both of these things have been found across the state. It was not found in 2021. So what did we look for? So here's the oak wilt fungus. So none of the samples were positive for oak wilt. We also take soil samples and looking for different Phytophthora root rots. And so we did not find any Phytophthora in 2021. Like I said, we did find the Diplodia cankers. And so those were found, like I said, in Harford and Talbot counties. There was another positive of a different Diplodia, not Diplodia corticula, but Diplodia gale. So that was the find in Baltimore County. And then, like I said, bacterial leaf scorch has been found in Maryland for a while now, but the declining oak samples in Talbot County were positive. The oaks that were declining in Talbot in 2021 were positive for bacterial leaf scorch. So one of the other things we're doing, looking for oak problems, is we also look for Phytophthora ramorum. And so this is a fairly virulent form of Phytophthora that has not been found in Maryland. It is mostly found in the nursery trade and not in the actual environments. So we have set up these locations here where we do a stream baiting, looking for this disease in, we take non-positive leaf material and put it into water that is collected from all of these streams to see if the disease is in the environment. And as you can see here, all of our sites were negative for Phytophthora ramorum. So that's really great. And then finally, with our oak pests, not only do we look at diseases, but we looked for new oak pests. So the oak splendor beetle, oak processionary moth, and oak ambrosia beetle. So oak splendor, processionary moth, oak ambrosia beetle. And so we did not find, you can see the 10 sites across the state. We did not find any of these across the state. So what does that mean? So unfortunately, there's no smoking gun for all of our oak decline problems. There is Phytophthora in the environment. Most of it's Phytophthora cinnamoni. There's the Diplodia canker. There's also bacterial leaf scorch in the environment. And, we're looking at it like there's a lot of stressors that are causing these declines. It's not necessarily one thing. So it's really a site by site sort of issue. And unfortunately, we haven't been able to find like the one thing that's causing all of our issues. The next pest I was going to talk about is walnut twig beetles. So that's these little beetles here. They've been known to cause dieback mortality in eastern black walnut. However, that is outside of eastern black walnut's range. So where these beetles were causing mortality is in Colorado, where eastern black walnut was planted out of area. And we have had the first finds, on the East Coast are Tennessee, Virginia, and Pennsylvania, and us in Maryland in 2013. And so we've had this beetle in our environment for about 9 years. And so most of our trees in our original Cecil County site are still doing well. And in fact, we haven't been able to collect a beetle in that Cecil County site for the last 3 years. And so while this walnut twig beetle does bring this fungus here that you can see that causes what's called thousand cankers disease. And, so like this says here, the cankers, all these beetles are obviously very small since this is the head of Abraham Lincoln. And so it's basically death by 1,000 cuts. And each of those beetles galleries is going to have this disease. And then all the galleries start to grow, and then they start to all coalesce into each other so that it's 1,000 cankers. So even though we have both found the beetle and been able to detect the disease in our walnuts here in Maryland, we have not been seeing any sort of dieback, and most of the trees are still very healthy. So where have we found these beetles? So this is our original detection site in Cecil County. You can see we have a lot of traps up here looking to see if the beetle has moved, and it has not. In addition, like I said, these traps have not been positive for 3 years. Where are we currently finding beetles is in Baltimore City and in Anne Arundel County. And so these trees are also doing well. They're a little more stressed because, these here are street trees, but they are still not dying currently. And so what that means for Maryland is that since we have not been able to detect mortality, they're talking about rescinding the walnut twig beetle quarantine area. So the current quarantine area is a small pocket of Cecil County, as well as Baltimore City and parts of Baltimore County. Since our trees are still doing well and this beetle doesn't seem to be causing that many issues like they saw in Colorado, they'll be removing the quarantine. Pennsylvania, as of January 1st of this year, has also rescinded their walnut twig beetle quarantine. Next, we're moving on to beech. So beech bark disease. So this disease has been in Maryland for a while. It causes mortality and defects in American beech. There are American beech that have been known to be able to withstand the fungus. And so what happens is a beech scale moves in, and so then that beech scale then brings in the fungus, and then the fungus is then what causes the decline of the tree. So a lot of problems is basically because the weakened trees tend to snap, and so you'll think you'll be okay, and then all of a sudden you're not with the beech snap. And so that's it causes a lot of problems for landowners. And so what does that look like? So all of these little dots are all scales. So that is a heavily infested tree with beech scale. The Nectria fungus here, you can see that all here along the beech. And then, you know, the damage caused to the bark, it can cause a lot of bark cracks and bark crevices, and just generally makes an issue for beech. And so where have we found beech bark disease in Maryland? So currently Garrett, Allegheny counties are where we find beech bark disease. We found scale from Allegheny through Garrett. Those are all those yellow dots. And then where the Nectria fungus, that red fungus was found, are all the red dots. So in 2021, we found mostly the Nectrias in Garrett County, where they have seen mortality in the past for beech bark disease. And then the rest of our state is unaffected. So you can see all these gray dots were all surveys of beech trees. And while some had bark cracks in bark, none of them had the scale insect or the Nectria fungus. And then the biggest one right now that we're concerned about is beech leaf disease. So beech leaf disease is found all around us. So Ohio, Pennsylvania, it's all through the north, the Northeast, now New York. And this is causing mortality within 1 year of infection in a lot of understory trees. So a lot of small trees are dying very quickly from this disease. And they also have seen mature trees dying within 4 to 5 years. So this affects both native and ornamental beech. It's associated, this disease is associated with the little Linkus nematode. So it's still, it's pretty well established that areas that have beech bark disease also have this nematode. The symptoms here you can see are this leaf striping in between the interveinal spaces, as well as you can see this like really bright yellowing necrotic tissue in between. You can see this here is that yellowing here is what it looks like. So this is looking, this bottom picture is looking up from the underside of the leaf. This picture here is looking at the top of the leaf. A lot of the symptoms are really easier to view from the underside of the leaf. So if you're looking for beech leaf disease, looking at the underside of the leaf, looking up into the canopy is a lot of times where you can see the disease. Just with the light, it kind of brings out that discoloration pretty quickly. Other symptoms, leathery texture, reduced leaf and bud production. Sometimes the nematodes are found in buds. And so a lot of times you'll just see where these buds just kind of are either not there or they've just kind of desiccated themselves. Let's see here. So we have not currently found beech leaf disease in any of our site surveys. So here's where we did over 300, I think it was 312 surveys in 2021, and we've just done under 300, I think it's like 298 surveys in 2022. So both of these years we did not find symptoms. However, there has been a positive find with a site that's showing no beech leaf disease symptoms, and the nematode has not been able to be found. However, it is coming up positive in molecular tests that show that there's nematode DNA at the site. So what does that mean? So it means that the nematode has been found, even nematode DNA has been found at this site, even though we have not specifically found the nematode themselves. And so that is still currently being discussed between all of the scientists, but that was in Anne Arundel County. So no beech leaf disease symptoms in Maryland in 2022, but just that one site of an asymptomatic sample that was taken that was found to be positive for the DNA. In addition to our site surveys, we also take measurements of beech trees at 17 different sites across the state. So these are what we call permanent plots. So we take a lot of different characteristics, a lot of measurements of beech trees in these plots, and no beech leaf disease was detected in these permanent plots either. Let's see. Oh, all right. Let's see if we can go through some of these really quickly. Hemlock woolly adelgid, it's another pest. It's affecting, it can cause mortality of trees. Here's a woolly sacs. Here's a crawler there. These are eggs. What do we do for suppression? So we do both trunk injections, which looks really similar to what we do for EAB because it's the same equipment, just a different chemical. So we use imidacloprid for HWA suppression. The trunk injections we do within 50 feet of water. So you can see here's a nice creek. So that's why we're treating this hemlock with a trunk injection versus a soil injection. Here are two different soil injectors, an Easy Eject and a Curates. And then we also do Cortec tablets for small trees when we're doing restoration. So in total, we've treated 121,704 trees. So it's pretty awesome, and over 1 million inches of DBH since our treatment has begun. And this past year, 17,980 trees were treated. So it's pretty cool. And so I will say, most of our trees are out here in Garrett County, but we do have sites that we treat throughout the state, as well as one in Queen Anne's, one in Talbot, and then our most southern site is in Calvert County. We also release predators. So here's where we release predators. Basically, in the last couple of years, we've only released these Laricobius beetles, so Laricobius nigrinus and Laricobius osakensis, and these are the sites that we've released them. This past year, we released in Garrett and Baltimore counties. The kind of cool thing about these guys is that we have an insectary in Rocky Gap, and we're trying to set up an insectary also in Big Run State Park. And so these are areas that have a lot of beetles so that we can collect them ourselves and spread them out throughout the state versus versus needing an actual lab to send us beetles. So that's kind of cool. So here you can see, again, the majority of what we are releasing currently is Laricobius nigrinus at 31,000 individuals. We also do hemlock restoration. So here's a kind of cool map of where we've replanted hemlocks in Cunningham Falls State Park over the years. And so you can see we've been replanting trees since 2016 at this site. In addition, we look for Cyrex wood wasp. So this is what it looks like. It's currently in Pennsylvania and New York. It attacks pines. So we look for it across the state, and we have not found it. We have found some native cericids, so that's kind of what these guys look like. You can see, the Cyrex has this black abdomen, where these guys have these reddish ones. So it's pretty obvious when we look in a trap, but no Cyrex nactilia found. We also look for red bay ambrosia beetle, which causes laurel wilt. No red bay ambrosia was found. And a new pest that I wanted to bring up is elm zigzag sawfly. So this sawfly was reported and found in Garrett County. And so here is actual damage. So it's called zigzag because it has that zigzag pattern back and forth. These attack elms. Currently, it's not causing a lot of defoliation in Garrett County, but in Virginia, it has and North Carolina, it has caused some major damage to elm. So like I said, Virginia, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and it's also been found in Canada. And so currently, just Garrett County is where it's been confirmed. There have been reports in Baltimore and Anne Arundel County, but we have not seen actual specimens to be able to confirm those reports, just damage seen. And so we're going to be looking at this pest. So if you find this pest out in, we would really like to know, and because we'd like to keep track of where this is currently. They're just deciding on its regulation status, but that is something that the USDA does and not something that we do, but we are just tracking the pests and for just keeping an eye on where it is across the state. But with these reports in Garrett and Baltimore, it seems like it's already really widespread. And that's it. So, you know, basically any day you can be stuck in a sticky situation. Here's me treating ash in one of our wet sites, and yep, I am up to my hips. So, you know, we are here to help you out. Here is my contact information, email address, and phone number. I am the Eastern, like I said, the Eastern Shore Regional Entomologist, but I do have statewide duties as the Forest Health Entomologist, so I'm happy to help. And on that note, I will stop sharing.
Great. Thank you, Heather. That was a
Yep.
lot of information. You guys are busy keeping all those bugs straight. I'm not currently seeing any questions in the chat box, but I'll give the participants a few minutes to drop any questions you may have for Heather in the MDA Forest Management Division down in the chat box. A little quiet. Is everybody cold? I have to train myself to say spongy moth now.
Yeah.
I'm working on that.
Oh, here comes a couple.
Yes, the recording will be sent out probably by Friday through Eventbrite.
And are you interested in reporting oak wilt? Yes, we are. So if you see something that looks like oak wilt, we're happy to either confirm that for you by taking samples, or if you have confirmation from other labs, we would definitely, you know, love to hear about it. And because we kind of keep track of that stuff currently. And since we've been surveying for oak wilt, we've only been able to find it in a previously positive site in Allegheny County.
I'm still fascinated at the fact that you have traps outside of the port.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Here we go. This is Marianne says, this is very depressing. What's the prognosis for Maryland forests? I live on a wooded lot and have lost 8 trees in 6 years from ambrosia beetles and emerald ash borers.
Yeah, so so there's, you know, I think currently I think we're in a spot where, and this is why we're like looking for things like red bay ambrosia beetle, is because it seems like our forests are trying to acclimate to this climate change and new environmental pattern that we are living in. And so as far as a prognosis for Maryland forests, I mean, as long as the trees are able to, as long as we are good forest stewards and have, you know, are good forest stewards and have a healthy forest, these trees should be resilient enough to be able to come back from some things. Unfortunately, I feel like we're in this spot now in our history where what used to be really good for Maryland forests might not always be really good for Maryland forests. And so we're just going to have to kind of keep an eye on regeneration and see how that works for us in the future. Yeah, it's definitely frustrating. And with a lot of these invasive pests, definitely, you know, can be depressing. But the good thing is that with a lot of things, they, you know, they can come back from as long as they're healthy enough too.
Heather, can you remind me of your office phone number? I'm going to put it in the chat.
Yep. So it's 410-822-8234.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Well, I think at this point we can dismiss everyone. I appreciate Heather you taking time out of your day to give us the update.
Yep. No problem.
Always look
Have a great day, everyone.
Fall update. Take care.